It was a quiet afternoon in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of day where nobody expected anything dramatic to happen. People walked lazily through the streets, sipping iced coffee, carrying shopping bags, laughing, scrolling through their phones, completely unaware that they were about to witness something unbelievable. In the middle of this ordinary scene walked a man who carried an extraordinary presence, Steven Seagal. But today, he wasn't dressed like a movie star. No cameras, no entourage, no attention, just a simple black jacket, dark sunglasses, and a grocery bag in each hand. He looked like any regular man running errands on a Sunday. And that's exactly where the problem started. As Steven walked past a row of parked cars, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the street. Inside sat Officer Bradley, a man known for making quick assumptions and acting before thinking. His eyes narrowed the moment he spotted Steven. Bradley muttered to himself, "Yeah, that looks like him. Matches the description." Without warning, he slammed the cruiser door and marched straight toward Steven. "Hey, you," he barked. His voice echoed across the sidewalk, startling several pedestrians. Steven paused, turning his head slightly. "Yes, officer," he replied calmly, his deep voice quiet but steady. But the officer didn't listen. He didn't care about the grocery bags. He didn't care about the peaceful expression on Steven's face. He didn't even care about verifying who he was talking to. All he saw was someone who, in his eyes, didn't belong in this neighborhood. "Hands where I can see them. Right now," the officer shouted, already stepping closer, hand hovering near his holster. People nearby stopped walking. Some stepped backward. A few raised their phones, sensing the situation might escalate. Steven blinked slowly, unfazed. "Officer, I think you've got the wrong guy," he said. But the officer's tone only grew harsher. "Did I ask for excuses? I said hands up. You fit the description of a suspect, and you better cooperate." Steven had been in dozens of movies, hundreds of action scenes, and thousands of dangerous moments. But this was different. This was real. And the tension in the air thickened as the crowd watched, holding their breath. What Steven Seagal did next shocked everyone standing there. The sidewalk had fallen silent. People who were rushing moments earlier now stood frozen, watching an officer bark orders at a man who wasn't resisting, wasn't causing trouble, wasn't doing anything except standing there with grocery bags in his hands. But Officer Bradley didn't care. His voice grew louder, his posture more aggressive. Every step he took towards Steven Seagal felt like a challenge, like he was trying to provoke a reaction. "Drop the bags. Now," he shouted, his hand hovering dangerously close to his taser. Steven gently set his groceries on the ground. Nothing inside threatened anyone, just vegetables, water bottles, and a carton of eggs that slid slightly from the impact. "Officer," Steven said in a calm, steady tone, "I'm telling you, I think you're making a mistake." But calmness only irritated Bradley more. "Don't tell me what I'm doing wrong," he snapped. "What are you doing in this neighborhood? You live around here? Working here? Visiting?" "What?" Steven inhaled deeply. "I'm minding my own business, sir. That's all." The officer scoffed. "Oh yeah? That's what they all say." By now, the tension had attracted a full crowd. People whispered among themselves. "Why is he treating that guy like that? He didn't do anything. Is this really happening right now?" Several phones were held high, already recording. The incident was on video, and everyone knew where this could lead. Bradley took another step closer, staring into Steven's sunglasses. "You look nervous," he said. "You look guilty." Steven Seagal, nervous? If the crowd wasn't so anxious, they would have laughed. Steven slowly shook his head. "I'm not nervous, just disappointed." That word triggered the officer instantly. "Disappointed? Oh, so now you want to talk back." He jabbed a finger toward Steven's chest. "You think you can get smart with me? You think I don't know what's going on here?" Steven didn't move, didn't break eye contact, didn't let the rising aggression pull him into a fight. His discipline was unreal. "Sir," Steven said softly, "you're escalating something that doesn't need to escalate." The crowd murmured louder. They felt the unfairness, the imbalance of power, the unnecessary hostility. A mother with her child whispered, "Why is that officer yelling at him like that?" A teenager muttered, "Man, this isn't right." But Bradley pushed forward like a man trying to prove authority he didn't truly have. "I said show me ID. Right now." His hand grabbed Steven's wrist abruptly, twisting it. The crowd gasped. Phones zoomed in. Steven stayed unbelievably calm. "Officer, You didn't even let me reach for it, Steven said quietly. Don't talk back to me, Bradley barked. The crowd couldn't believe what they were seeing. Someone treating Steven Seagal like a random criminal on the street, refusing to listen, refusing to think, too blinded by ego to recognize the man in front of him. And the most shocking part? Steven still didn't fight back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't push the officer away. He didn't use force, even though every single person watching knew he could end this in seconds. But discipline was stronger than pride. People whispered louder now. Who is this guy? Why is he so calm? Is he famous? He looks really familiar. Have you ever seen someone abused by authority? And tell me, which country or city are you watching from right now? The crowd leaned in closer as the situation grew more tense, more unfair, more unbelievable. And everyone watching sensed it. The worst was yet to come. The grocery bags lay scattered on the pavement. The eggs had cracked, dripping slowly between the tiny gaps in the pavement tiles, like a countdown. Steven Seagal stood perfectly still. The crowd held its breath. Officer Bradley tightened his grip on Steven's wrist, twisting it as if he were handling a dangerous criminal, not a man calmly offering his ID. You're resisting, Bradley barked. Everyone watching knew it was a lie. No, he's not, someone shouted. Officer, he didn't do anything. A teenager raised his phone higher. He shouted, Bro, it's all on camera. You're overdoing it. But Bradley ignored the world around him. His ego had fully taken control. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was about power, and about proving he could dominate someone who refused to fear him. Steven spoke gently. Officer, please. You're making a mistake. Bradley's eyes narrowed. Mistake? No, you made the mistake, coming here. He grabbed Steven's other wrist. The crowd gasped. Because before anyone could blink. Click. One cuff snapped shut. For the first time, Steven's face changed. Not anger. Not fear. Just disappointment. Deep disappointment. Sir, Steven said quietly, I'd prefer if you didn't do that. But Bradley was too far gone. You're under arrest, he muttered aggressively. For resisting, for interfering, for lying for existing, someone in the crowd yelled in frustration. Bradley whipped his head around. Everyone back up, but nobody moved. In fact, they stepped closer. Because something felt terribly wrong. The second cuff hovered inches from Steven's other wrist. And at that exact moment, a voice from the crowd whispered loudly enough for others to hear. Wait, is that Steven Seagal? Head suddenly turned. Eyes widened. The realization rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. A man near the front leaned in. Bro, that is him. That's literally Steven Seagal. A girl whispered. Wait, the action star? The martial arts guy? Yes. Look at him. That's him. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The crowd didn't just feel bad for the man. They realized the officer was arresting someone he absolutely should not be messing with. Some people started recording even closer. Others started yelling. Officer, do you even know who you're arresting? Check your eyes, man. That's a whole legend. Bradley ignored them. Or maybe he didn't hear over the sound of his own inflated self-importance. He shoved Steven slightly. Steven didn't budge. He simply said, Officer, I'm going to ask again, please stop. The calmness in his tone almost made the moment scarier. Because the crowd suddenly realized. This was a man capable of breaking out of those cuffs. This was a man capable of ending this confrontation in seconds. This was a man who had taken down entire rooms of attackers in movies, and plenty in real life. But he still refused to use force. Bradley, however, mistook calm for weakness. Turn around, he ordered. Hands behind your back. The crowd watched, stunned, as Steven exhaled slowly, nodding. I will, he said. But only if you listen to what I'm saying. And what's that? Bradley mocked. That you've arrested the wrong man. Bradley rolled his eyes. I hear that every day, Steven added. And this time, it's true. But the officer didn't care. He grabbed both of Steven's wrists, yanking them behind his back. And then the second cuff came down. Click. The sound echoed like a slap across the entire street. The crowd erupted. This is wrong. Let him go. He didn't do anything. He's cooperating. Why are you cuffing him? A woman shouted. Officer, he's not resisting. You're the one acting crazy. Bradley spun around, furious. Everyone back OFF. This is official police business. But no one stepped away. They saw injustice. They saw abuse of power. And now they were watching a celebrity, a martial artist, a man known worldwide, being treated like garbage for no reason. Steven, hands cuffed behind him, finally turned his head to the crowd. Not angry, not scared, just calm. And he asked in a voice that cut through the chaos, "Tell me, if you were standing here right now, in my place, would you stay calm or would you speak up?" Phones pointed at him. People whispered. Some teared up, because the question wasn't just for them. It was for everyone watching the story later. It was for the viewer. It was for you. Bradley grabbed Steven's arm to lead him toward the patrol car. But then, something happened. A man pushed through the crowd, dressed in a suit, wearing a badge around his neck. "Officer Bradley," he shouted sharply. The officer turned. The man raised his voice louder. "Uncuff him. Right now." The crowd went silent again. Bradley blinked, confused. Who are you?" The man stepped forward, flashing his identification. "I'm your superior. And that man," he pointed directly at Steven Seagal, "is not who you think he is." The officer's face went pale. The crowd watched, hearts pounding. Because whatever was about to happen next was going to change everything. Officer Bradley froze. His hand hovered awkwardly near Steven's shoulder, unsure whether to push him forward or step back. The superior officer, a tall, sharp-faced man named Lieutenant Harris, marched toward them with a thunderstorm in his eyes. The crowd parted instantly, giving him a clear path. Harris stopped just a foot away from Bradley. "What?" he growled. "Do you think you're doing?" Bradley swallowed. "Sir, I detained a suspect who matches." Harris cut him off sharply. "Matches what? Your imagination?" A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Phones shot up higher. People whispered urgently to one another. "That cop is in trouble. He messed with the wrong guy. Bro, it's over for him." But Bradley tried to salvage the moment. "Sir, I followed protocol," he said, his voice trembling just slightly. He refused to identify himself. "He did identify himself," Harris snapped. "And even if he didn't, you had no grounds to escalate." Steven stood calmly between the two officers, hands still cuffed behind him. His face remained unreadable. No anger, no ego, just patience and a quiet disappointment that felt heavier than rage. Harris turned to him. "Mr. Seagal." He exhaled deeply. "I am so sorry about this." That name hit Bradley like a punch to the chest. His eyebrows shot up. His mouth fell open. His hand slipped away from Steven's arm instinctively, as if touching him had suddenly become dangerous. Seagal." Bradley stuttered. "Wait. Steven Seagal." The crowd erupted. "Told you. That's him. The real Steven Seagal." "Officer, how do you not recognize him?" Bradley stared at Steven, speechless. The haircut, the sunglasses, the jacket, everything suddenly looked familiar. How many times had he seen this man on TV? In movies? On posters? And yet, he had cuffed him like a nobody. I didn't realize," Bradley whispered, shaking his head. Steven finally spoke, turning to face him. "Officer," he said softly, "a man shouldn't need fame to be treated with respect." The crowd fell silent at those words. Steven wasn't attacking him. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't humiliating him. He was teaching him. Harris stepped beside Steven and addressed Bradley with complete authority. "Uncuff him," Harris ordered. "Now." The command hit the air like thunder. Bradley fumbled with the key, hands shaking so badly that he dropped it once. Someone in the crowd even laughed under their breath. Finally, the cuffs clicked open. Steven flexed his wrists gently, the red marks visible and painful to look at. The crowd booed the officer loudly. Shame. That was abuse. Treating a legend like trash. Bradley stepped back, face red, embarrassed beyond words. He kept shaking his head, trying to process what he had done. I'm sorry, he whispered. "I didn't know." Steven raised a hand, signaling for him to stop talking. "Officer," he said calmly, "you need to understand something." Everyone leaned in. Even Harris watched with curiosity. Steven continued, "You didn't hurt me because you didn't know who I was. You hurt me because you didn't care who I was. You judged me based on a look, not on my actions." Bradley looked down at his shoes. The crowd murmured in agreement. "He's right. Facts." He really humbled the cop. Harris sighed heavily. "Mr. Seagal," he said, "I assure you this will be handled internally." But Steven shook his head. "No, I don't want revenge," he said. "I want change." The words carried more power than shouting ever could. The entire block went silent again, listening. Steven looked at Bradley directly. "You're not a bad man," he said. "But this behavior? It's dangerous. It humiliates people. It destroys trust." Bradley looked up slowly. I understand." "No," Steven replied gently. "You need to learn. You need to listen. You need to see beyond assumptions." For once, Bradley didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't try to justify anything. He just nodded. Steven took a deep breath. "I've seen violence all my life," he said. "In movies, in real situations, in places most people never want to be. But real strength," he tapped his chest lightly, "comes from restraint." The crowd applauded. Not loudly, not wildly, but respectfully, like they were witnessing something meaningful. A moment later, a woman pushed forward through the crowd with her phone trembling in her hand. "Mr. Seagal," she said nervously, "you're a hero. Can I take a picture?" Steven smiled warmly. Of course. People gathered around him, grateful, excited, buzzing with disbelief. Bradley stepped back into the shadow of the crowd, guilt eating him alive. Harris put a firm hand on his shoulder. "You and I," he said coldly, "will be having a very long conversation." The crowd cheered again as Steven posed for a quick photo. But nobody knew. The biggest twist in this story was still coming. Lieutenant Harris kept his hand on Officer Bradley's shoulder, gripping it tightly enough to deliver a warning without saying another word. Bradley stood frozen, staring at the ground as the crowd continued to take pictures with Steven Seagal. Every cheer, every camera flash, every whisper of legend and hero drove a deeper wedge of shame into Bradley's gut. He felt like the entire world had turned against him in a single moment. And the truth was, he wasn't wrong. People around him were murmuring loudly. "That cop needs training. He totally abused his power. He cuffed Steven Seagal. What a clown." Bradley winced at every comment. Steven finished taking pictures and thanked the crowd politely. But instead of leaving, he looked back at the disgraced officer, the very man who had cuffed him minutes ago. The entire street grew quiet again. Steven stepped toward him. Bradley took a step back. "Officer," Steven said calmly, "I'm not here to embarrass you." Bradley didn't answer. His jaw tightened. His eyes stayed low. But Steven continued. "I could have fought back. I could have resisted. I could have humiliated you in front of all these people." The crowd murmured, because they all knew that was true. Steven Seagal wasn't someone you could push around physically. "But I didn't," Steven said. "And do you know why?" Bradley finally looked up. "Why?" he asked, voice shaky. Steven tapped 2 fingers against his own chest. "Because strength isn't about overpowering people. It's about controlling yourself even when you could do more." Bradley swallowed hard. "You misjudged me," Steven added. "You profiled me. You escalated without cause. You acted out of fear, not training." Every word hit Bradley like a punch. He whispered, "I messed up." Steven nodded. "Yes, you did." The crowd went silent again. A lesson was coming. A big one. Steven stepped closer, voice deep but warm. "But you have a chance right now to do something most people never do. You can learn from this." Bradley's breath hitched. His eyes glistened slightly, not in anger, but in humiliation and realization. "You don't have to be the officer who abuses his position," Steven said. "You can become the officer who protects people, who listens, who treats everyone with respect." A tear actually escaped the officer's eye. But then, a rough voice cut through the air. "Hey, move out of the way." The crowd turned. A man pushed through, panting, sweating, wearing a gray hoodie. His eyes darted nervously around. Harris stiffened. Steven's expression sharpened instantly, instincts kicking in like a switch being flipped. Bradley blinked in shock. "Wait, that's..." Harris finished the sentence. "The real suspect we were looking for." The crowd gasped. The man looked panicked. He realized he was surrounded. Dozens of witnesses, 2 officers, and Steven Seagal himself. "Back off," the suspect yelled, shoving a woman aside and trying to run. Instinct took over in every police officer present. But Steven moved first. Not violently, not aggressively, just precise. He stepped in front of the woman, blocking her fall with one arm, and planted himself between the suspect and the terrified crowd. The man tried to sprint past him. Bad idea. Steven didn't punch. He didn't kick. He didn't slam the guy. He simply sidestepped, grabbed the suspect's wrist, spun him around, and pinned him gently but firmly against the wall, all in one smooth motion that happened so fast the crowd barely saw it. Gasps filled the street. Someone yelled, "Bro, what was that?" Another whispered, "He took him down like he was nothing." Even Officer Bradley stared wide-eyed. Steven held the suspect in place effortlessly. "No need for violence," Steven said calmly. "Just breathe." Harris and Bradley rushed forward. They snapped handcuffs on the actual criminal, this time with full justification. Bradley looked at Steven, completely humbled. "That was incredible," he whispered. Steven smiled faintly. "It's not about strength," he replied. "It's about control." The crowd broke into applause. Some even cheered his name. "Hero, Seagal. This man is a legend." But Steven didn't acknowledge the praise. Instead, he turned to Bradley again, while the applause roared behind them. "You see," Steven said, "this is why restraint matters. This is why you listen first. This is why you stay calm." Bradley nodded, overwhelmed. The world had just seen the difference between a real professional and someone who thought the uniform alone made him powerful. Steven clapped Bradley lightly on the shoulder. "Learn from this," he said softly. "Become better." And for the first time since the incident began, Bradley smiled, small, shaky, but genuine. "I will," he said. "I promise." The sirens faded. The suspect, the actual criminal, was now in custody. The danger had passed, but the moment was far from over. Because every single person on that block, every witness, every phone camera, every shocked bystander, they had all recorded what happened. And within minutes, the videos were already online. Steven Seagal stood next to Lieutenant Harris, watching as Officer Bradley quietly escorted the arrested criminal into the patrol car. Bradley's posture had changed completely. No arrogance, no hostility, no ego, only responsibility. The crowd began to disperse, but not without glancing back in disbelief. Some approached Steven one last time. "You handled that like a real hero. Thank you for protecting everyone. You could have destroyed that officer, but you chose peace, respect." Steven nodded humbly to each of them, but he didn't smile. Not yet, because for him, the lesson wasn't over. Meanwhile, 10 minutes later, phone notifications were exploding. The first video had hit 20,000 views, then 60,000, then 150,000. Within minutes, it was climbing toward the millions. The title was everywhere. "Racist cop handcuffs Steven Seagal. Huge mistake." Comments poured in. "Bro, how do you not recognize Steven Seagal? This officer needs serious training. Steven handled that like a monk. That calmness, damn. He didn't use violence even once." Respect. The world was watching. The moment had gone viral. Back on the street, Lieutenant Harris walked over to Steven. "Mr. Seagal," he said, "I've already called this into the station. Internal Affairs will review the footage. Officer Bradley will face consequences." Steven raised a hand gently. "I'm not here to get a man fired," he said. "I'm here to change the way he thinks." Harris nodded slowly. "I know, and that's exactly why your voice is more powerful than our badges." Bradley approached them hesitantly. His face was still red, part embarrassment, part guilt, part fear of what the world was already saying about him. "Mr. Seagal," he said quietly, "I saw the crowd's videos. I'm trending online." "That was expected," Steven replied calmly. "I look like a monster," Bradley whispered. Steven took a deep breath. "You acted like one," he said honestly. "But that doesn't mean you are one." Bradley looked down. Steven stepped closer. "What matters," Steven continued, "is what you do after the mistake." The officer's breathing grew shaky. "What should I do?" he asked. Steven thought for a moment. "Learn, train, grow," he said. "Become the kind of officer who protects, not intimidates." Bradley nodded. "I want to. I really do," he whispered. "I don't ever want to be that guy again." Steven rested a hand on his shoulder. "Good," he said softly. "Because the world is watching you now. You can't hide from this. You can only rise from it." Bradley wiped his face, holding back another tear. "I'll try," he said. "No," Steven corrected gently. "You'll do." Moments later, a wave of flashing lights illuminated the street. Not police lights, media lights. A swarm of news vans pulled up. Reporters jumped out, microphones ready. "Mr. Seagal, is it true you were wrongfully detained? Did the officer attack you? Are you filing charges? Was racial profiling involved? How did you stay so calm?" Lieutenant Harris tried to intervene. "Back up. Give him space." But Steven stepped forward, not aggressively, but with the calm presence of someone who had been under a spotlight his entire life. He raised both hands. "I'll speak. The crowd of reporters leaned in. Phones zoomed in. Microphones extended forward. Live streams started instantly. Steven began. What happened today wasn't about fame. It wasn't about celebrity treatment. It wasn't about violence. He glanced toward Bradley, who stood silently behind the officers. It was about judgment, Steven said, and how easily we make it. The reporters scribbled rapidly. Steven continued. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't scared. But many people without my skills or experience, wouldn't feel safe in that situation. His voice deepened. And that is the problem. A hush fell over the block. Cars passing by slowed down just to listen. Police officers have a difficult job, Steven added. But difficult doesn't mean careless. Stressful doesn't mean aggressive. Authority doesn't mean abuse. Cameras flashed. Reporters nodded. Even the officers behind him looked ashamed and inspired at the same time. Steven finished with a line the world would quote for days. Respect doesn't come from a badge, it comes from character. And today was a reminder that we must judge less and listen more. The crowd applauded. Bradley looked at the ground, but this time not in shame. In gratitude. Steven turned away from the reporters, walked toward his crushed grocery bags, and picked them up piece by piece. Quiet, humble, human. And while he did, millions of views became, millions of shares, millions of comments, millions of people learning the lesson he delivered. The world had heard him, but Part 7 would reveal something bigger. The consequences, the transformation, and the impact that spread far beyond one street. That be why the time Steven Seagal arrived home that evening, his phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, interviews requested, news alerts, millions of notifications. The story had exploded. His name was #1 on every platform. Hashtags were trending in dozens of countries. Multiple news anchors called it the most shocking public confrontation caught on camera this year. But Steven didn't sit in front of the TV. He didn't scroll through social media. He simply placed his cracked groceries on the kitchen counter, washed his hands, and sat silently for a moment, reflecting. Because this wasn't about viral fame. This wasn't about revenge. This was about the message he hoped people heard loud and clear. A knock sounded at the door. Steven opened it to find Lieutenant Harris, and, to his surprise, Officer Bradley. Bradley wasn't in uniform. He wore plain clothes, hands tucked nervously into his pockets, face more humble than Steven had ever seen. Mr. Seagal, Bradley said quietly, I wanted to thank you. Steven raised an eyebrow. For what? For not destroying me. Harris stepped forward. He requested to come. He wants to speak honestly. Steven nodded. Come in. They sat at the dining table. Bradley looked around, awkward but determined. Today changed me, he began. When I went back to the station, I watched the video, the full thing, and seeing myself from the outside, he swallowed hard. I was ashamed. Steven didn't interrupt. He let the man speak. I didn't see a cop doing his job, Bradley continued. I saw someone who judged too fast, someone who escalated, someone who didn't think about the person, only the power. Steven nodded slowly. That awareness, he said, is the first step. Bradley looked up. I want to be better. I want training. I want to unlearn the garbage I've picked up over the years. I want to be someone the public can trust again. Harris placed a hand on his shoulder. And the department will make sure he gets that chance, he said, with real supervision this time. Steven looked into Bradley's eyes and saw sincerity, remorse, and a desire to change. Good, Steven said. Because the world isn't judging you for your mistake. They're watching how you come back from it. Bradley nodded. I won't waste this opportunity, he said. Not after today. Steven stood and extended a hand. Bradley hesitated, then shook it firmly. A handshake that wasn't forced. Not defensive. Not hostile. Just human. The next morning, Steven finally turned on the TV. Every channel was covering the story. Not just the confrontation, but the positive message that followed. A clip played of Steven's speech. Respect doesn't come from a badge, it comes from character. It had become the most replayed quote of the day. Celebrities shared it. Activists shared it. Even police departments in other countries shared it as a reminder of proper conduct. Commentators called Steven's response calm under fire, a masterclass in restraint, the lesson the world needed. But what shocked Steven the most was seeing Officer Bradley on a local morning show. Not defensive, not blaming, not hiding, but admitting, I was wrong. And Steven Seagal changed me more than any training ever has. He promised to join new community programs, training seminars, and accountability groups. He vowed to rebuild trust. And Steven smiled, not because Bradley praised him, but because he meant every word. Later that evening, Steven uploaded a short message to his own social media, his only public comment since the incident. He looked directly into the camera. "No one should be judged by appearance," he said. "No one should fear those sworn to protect them. And no man becomes stronger by putting others down." He ended with, "If you believe in respect, equality, and humility, type respect in the comments." Within minutes, the post exploded. Respect, respect, respect. Thousands, then tens of thousands, then millions. And that was how a simple grocery run turned into a global conversation about power, humility, and the true meaning of strength. Not through violence, not through anger, but through calmness, courage, and character. Steven didn't just walk away from that incident unharmed. He walked away having changed someone and inspired millions. The wrong man was arrested, but the right lesson was learned.